Hello, and welcome to Beyond the Table, a show where we talk with authors and designers about games and novels and game-related things that inspire us. And today I am thrilled to have the Malaz authors, Cam Esslemont and Stephen Erikson, on the show. Gentlemen, thank you for coming and talking with us about. I don't even know if I can call it a series anymore. It's a series of series. It's its own oeuvre, the Malaz series. Thank you.
Certainly. Glad to be here.
Yeah,
Um,
thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
oh, it is entirely my pleasure. And from all of the fans on Reddit, we posted this on the subreddit for the Malazan books, and from the fans. And one of the constant comments was, "Can you just please thank them for the stories they've chosen to share with us?" And so I figured that was a good place as any to start. But for those who somehow have found the channel or the show and have no clue what Malaz is, would you be able to give an overview? How would you describe the series of series in your own words?
Oh my goodness. Um, okay. Oh, well, I can start. For me, I think in the sort of the biggest, the furthest back you can go and look at the whole is, I just look at it as sort of historical fiction, but with magic. That's sort of what it is. You know, we're not really making stuff up. In a sense, what we're doing is actually telling the history of a world, at a particular moment. And I think that's how I sort of regard it in the big picture.
Yeah, I would agree. It's but also a history written in the style of, I guess, the very earliest historians. So there's um a lot of sort of expansion of the universe to include the activities of gods and ascendants and demigods and all the rest as being active participants in that human history. So it's not quite your classic dry historical text. There's a bit more to it.
So when you say kind of in the classical sense, are we looking back at Homer, the
Mm-hmm.
Iliad, the epics of, Epic of Gilgamesh, that sort of style?
I think there's a lot of that.
Hmm.
Those are histories.
They
They
are.
are, they are.
Umberto Eco has a wonderful little essay on how stories like that are more true than our modern sense of historical facts. And he uses the example of Anna Karenina, that if someone came to you and said, actually, Anna Karenina did not die by throwing herself under the train, or, Hector was not killed by Achilles, you would call them crazy. But we could find documents that said Hitler actually did not die in the bunker and fled to Argentina and left out the rest of his life. And we would have to rewrite our notion of history. But Anna Karenina and Achilles fighting Hector, those are set in stone and are true on a level that our modern sense of history just cannot wrestle or grasp with.
Yeah, and I also think it's changing even more now because there's an ongoing creation of history that's an online presence.
Mm,
It's constantly active. So the history's become much more malleable and subject to um, alteration in order to suit the present. And
yes,
so I think we're all experiencing that now.
I would agree with that.
And that's
Well,
not new, of
oh,
course. These have been tools
mm-hmm.
for forever. They've always been bit propagandistic.
Yeah.
Um, now, all right. I have an outline, but outlines be damned.
Mm.
There is a wonderful book called An Introduction to Beauty. It's one of Oxford's like little books where they have like the little introductions to topics, and he talks about how art with an agenda or a bent is propaganda, And there's a moment in Fiends of Nightmaria where Bauchelain is talking about artists and how tyrants go after artists first because
Mhm.
artists have the means and the tools to inspire a populace, and the first people they call are the artists until all that are left are essentially the propagandists. And it was always interesting to me that I was reading these books kind of concurrently, and one's arguing for art for the sake of art for beauty, and one is arguing that as soon as that goes away, you know you're living in sort of a totalitarian dictatorship. And how is it that you, in sort of your most comical, I won't say absurdist, because I don't think Bauchelain or Corbel Broach are absurdist, but how is it that you use these very comedic characters in both of your series to get across these really weighty philosophical points?
You want to try that, Cam?
Oh dear. Well, I think that what you're trying to do is using both entertainment and instruction. And if you're using both tools and you are, it's the whole sugar, getting the medicine down and trying to find that balance of saying what you want to say, doing it in a way that's engaging and entertaining and will carry the message. And it's not even, message is too strong. It's more like an aesthetic.
Mm-hmm.
And, so you're just, there's that surface level story, but then for it to really, I think for it to be deep, you have to have all this subtext beneath it,
Mm-hmm.
being drawn along by it. And that you can delve into if you choose to. You don't have to. The reader can just be happily skimming along and enjoying the story. But if they want to, and they really want to think about what else is going on, that is there as well. And that adds such depth to the work.
Yeah, I think characters like, well, like Bocalain and Corbel Broach, one of the things that they allow is they are such despicable individuals in and of themselves that they can become the vehicle by which you can approach almost in defense of the indefensible.
Mm.
And so they can pontificate, especially Bocalain, on a whole series of theses and ideas and all the rest. But the reader knows that the guy is basically a sociopath and is utterly insane and a necromancer. So it's not like you have to buy into his worldview, and so that allows me to sort of present particular arguments through him, which has that sort of once removed, so that I'm not using Bocalain to stand on a platform and preach anything, right? Because he's dubious and suspect to
Mm-hmm.
begin. So that way one can play with all kinds of ideas, and use him as the spokesperson for anything pretty
Right.
much.
Is it sort of the uh, like the old role of the court jester who could even say to the king whatever needed to be said, but couched in sort of the role that he's in, um,
Yeah,
to a
I
degree?
guess, but the court jester is all about subterfuge. It's all
True.
the court jester is knows that his head could roll at any moment, so he needs to bury his critique in something else, as a self-protective measure. So he obfuscates his position and his criticism of the power structure. Bocalain doesn't have that to worry about, right? He's right up front and he's in your face and
It's
he's
true.
fearless. So
Um, two of my favorite characters in the series. Like just I'm rereading through Memories of Ice right now. So that just the section I'm in, they're at the forefront. So it's no secret. It's not, been uh, obfuscated in any way that Malaz came out of your gaming experience, which you two were kind of in my literary journey were sort of the first to acknowledge this. And I know now Dungeons and Dragons have become much more popular, and there's a lot more people saying, "Oh, we got our inspiration from our D&D game. We did this. D&D taught me to be a storyteller." But I would really love to hear your story about how this game came together and what's the story of how Malaz kind of came to be as a gaming experience long before it became um, the novel series that we know.
Well, I had been gaming for some time, through high school and onward into university. And then when I met Steve on a dig, I naturally said, "Hey, let's spend some time. Let's try this game out." And we set it up, and with the guy who was running the camp, and the whole thing was a complete disaster. It was just. As anyone who's experienced a gaming knows that it's very hard to get the sort of what we're actually doing across.
Mm-hmm.
So at the moment that there was an attack or something, they all just ran away and in different directions, and there was no group anymore. So it took a couple tries to catch on. But we found that our aesthetic, our sense of humor, were they worked together, and so we could make each other laugh, and that just carried on.
Yeah, Cam was the veteran gamer. I knew nothing about it. But when we ended up both in the writing program at University of Victoria, well, then we were roommates, and we gamed incessantly, probably more than we did writing fiction in the writing program. But everything, because we were in a writing program, there was great emphasis on narrative, and so the games became another means of narrative and of characterization and of setting and world building, in fact, but all as actually part of a narrative. And I think we always had sort of, or pretty early on, we had ambitions to either create a game system or a GURPS based Malazan world for gaming. And then eventually, because we're both writing fiction, the idea of film scripts. And our first film scripts weren't Malazan; they were other storylines and stuff. So we had already had some experience with script writing when we finally shifted over to just for fun writing epic fantasy for the big screen, which was a hopeless endeavor to begin with because the industry wasn't interested,
Right.
basically.
Yeah, this was what, late 80s, or
Yeah.
and we were told, no one does that anymore.
Yeah.
Sandals and swords, that's done. And so we were turned down at every door.
Yeah.
So taking a sidestep away from this, you mentioned GURPS, and from what I've read and seen in interviews, you started with AD&D, and then when you were introduced to GURPS, sort of pivoted into GURPS. And for those of you who don't know much about GURPS, the magic system is broken up into schools or colleges of different styles of magic. Is that sort of where the Warrens came from? Because when I heard that, I mean, they're not a one for one map, but I could see how, hey, if you looked at the Earth College of Magic and you looked at the aspect of Driss, it's kind of like, oh, okay, these things sort of make sense. Talon and fire. And did the Warrens evolve out of the GURPS magic system, or did you already have the Warrens in mind when you were heading into your GURPS gaming?
I remember in Steve's early works, we were sharing early drafts of stories and stuff at the same time. And I think he already had this idea of portals or moving between dimensions. And I think we just sort of put the two together, put magic and each realm of magic being its own dimension almost, where you could step into it and it has physical reality. And I think we just sort of put them together, maybe.
Yeah, I remember. But you're right. I think the GURP system was certainly a good foundational aspect to setting things up. And I know that whatever system we were messing around with, we would alter to suit what we were doing. And I remember coming up with this idea of the lost elementals, because normally you've got your four primary elementals, which show up in all kinds of systems. But I thought it'd be interesting if there were other elementals, elemental forces, for example, light, dark, life, death, things like even time as a lost element. So just to expand that initial sort of notion of people play with the ideas of fire, air, water, whatever, to expand, I guess, thematically, but also metaphysically into those other elements, which then kind of help the magic system fill itself out and become more complete, I guess, in some respects.
Yeah. We're currently having a discussion, the chat is having a discussion on Twitch on whether GURPS would be best, or now Savage Worlds, or basic roleplay system, if they were going to run their own Malazan game. And I think any of those would be just fantastic. I've done a lot of work in GURPS and Savage Worlds, and I think both of those would work really well, but I'm a big fan of BRP, which is the Call of Cthulhu core mechanic. We had some questions from Reddit on this, though, and Steel Riddler was wondering which of the storylines out of any of the books is closest to how you actually gained out something at the table. Is there one that stands out, like this is basically how it went down, and I'm translating that into the fiction?
I'm not sure which one was closest, but there are some sort of classic moments that we've used, like Calimbed's end.
Yes.
We gamed that through, and I kept to it pretty close in Night of Knives.
Night of Knives.
Yeah, and I would think the fete at the end of Gardens of the Moon.
Oh, yes.
It was pretty close. That's my recollection. But also scenes with Baruch, some scenes with Krupp, a lot of the rooftop stuff. Although I think the rooftop with Crocus, this is spoiler stuff, obviously, but
yes, there will be spoilers for the entire series here.
Yeah, the rooftop stuff I think was actually from the film script, as opposed to actual gaming, because we didn't have Crocus as a character.
Oh, really?
No, he was created for the purposes of the film script, actually, more than anything else.
Was he sort of the point of view character for the audience, like?
Essentially,
initially, anyway.
Yeah.
And we were also told by these really smart filmmaking guys that we had to have a romantic interest.
Yeah.
So we're like, okay, we'll put one in.
Yeah.
Sigh.
Yeah.
And many books later, you were dealing with the fallout of that decision.
Yeah.
But in the fete, I remember that very much. Just almost exactly how it went. I mean, and Rake makes this, huge entrance, and we're right there at the tabletop, we're gaming it, and then Krupp walks right up to him, he's got pastry smeared all over his face, and he goes, "Cream puff?"
Yeah.
Whose
the
character was Krupp?
me. So Cam was running that campaign in Darujhistan, and I had Krupp, Ralak Nom, um, another character who never showed up in the books. I think those were the three.
And earlier he had been running Rig. Rig was his character, but
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So that was a bit weird. I was having to bring all the character sheets together for a scenario that I'd never anticipated actually happening.
All of them coming together at the same
All of
time.
them coming together. Yeah. So it was very much like I think it all started with the selection of the masks that the characters were going to wear. I have a very, very vivid memory of that. And I had Krupp select that cherub's mask.
the
And
cherubs.
then, yeah, something that I could smear pastry all over.
Pastry all over. Somebody asked the question, can you tell us about the character that never showed up? What do you remember that character?
Cam, do you remember his name? Was it Ferret?
What was the name?
Was it Ferret? Was it Ferret?
I don't recall.
You don't
Oh.
recall? Yeah, I mean he dropped away. I think you killed him off at some point early
Yeah.
on.
I think really early on, and just like Duker, he was my player character, and he just kept getting killed
Yeah.
all the time.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Somebody wanted to know, was Fellison a character, or was Fellison something that was developed for the series?
Just for the series. Yeah.
I know the person who's asking this, Tink, and Tink just loves Fellison's story. Like, it's so tragic and heartbreaking. And she's only in book 3, so I haven't told her anything else.
Right. Well, yeah, the whole rebellion stuff, that's fictional world as opposed to a lot of what we were gaming was the early foundational backstory, if you will, to what showed up in the novels. So the Conquest of 7 Cities, for example, was gamed.
Okay.
Which Cam's working on, he's writing in right now. So.
Right. That's the
my backstory series, the Tales of Ascension, that's closer to the gaming material.
Okay.
Early Empire stuff.
Early Empire. Excellent. Do you feel that gaming really helped develop, and this is a question from the Abstract Sound, do you feel like this added depth to the world and the characters, like being able to work them out and see them from other people's points of view, that just maybe writing it out wouldn't have given you that depth?
I think so. I think you could say that it added a dimension, and it was a bit more demanding. And
Yeah.
You really had to think about things a bit more. And of course, you had other eyes. You had a whole different feedback almost right away that was invaluable.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Yeah, I've always recommended people who want to get into writing, even if they're not going to write fantasy, to experience role playing, especially running a game, because role playing as somebody running the game, you have no control over your characters, and
Right.
so it forces a certain level of humility on the narrator, the narrative position, and I think that's really helpful and healthy for somebody who's going to be dealing with a whole multitude of characters and their points of view. Sometimes they're going to take over the story, or they're going to take you in different directions, and rather than fighting it, and I'm sure everybody who's gamed has had at least one person, running a game, one DM, who basically will not let you deviate from the storyline at all, right? And that can be pretty frustrating. So learning that as players, it's, at least for me, it gave me a sense that no, you gotta give the characters room to move around within that world. And so running a game, I think, is a great lesson for anybody who's going to take up, who's going to write.
I've also found that it helps me distinguish my characters' voices more easily, because there are other people's voices speaking into those characters. And so even if I don't use everything, it definitely, I'm taking a little bit of that aspect with me, so they're not all just coming out of here. They're, you know, I've got other people's insights and mannerisms and way they react to things that are outside of what I would be able to imagine because they're looking at it from a different angle.
Yeah.
So, do you guys still play any games today?
Unfortunately, I don't.
No.
I'm right. Steve carried on for some time.
Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of that was pretty foundational in the creation of the Bone Hunters as a military unit, and Fiddler's Squad. And certainly some scenes that show up late in the series. In fact, the 10th book came out of some of that gaming.
I
So that
read
was
the
with a
article.
group of, yeah, a group of players. So that was a little bit different from what Cam and I used to do, because one-on-one gaming is an unusual thing. You know, if you think back then, sort of the general attitude to people who were gaming was, you know, raise of an eyebrow and asking you when are you going to grow up, you
Yeah.
know, basically that kind of stuff. So, but within that community, the notion of one-on-one gaming also raised the eyebrows from the people who were actually running these games. So it was the weird of the weird, basically.
Yeah.
And yet we did so much, I think we did so much world building through that system, through just the one-on-one gaming. And bearing in mind that, you know, whoever was running the game would have 2-3 NPCs. Who's ever the player in the game would be running usually around 3 character sheets. So even though it was one-on-one, it involved a lot of people, fictitiously anyways.
Excellent. So I've got a couple, just to wrap up this first section about talking about gaming, I got a couple of questions from Redditors and fans who wanted to take this time to, you know, ask you a couple of questions. Educational Deer asked, is there an element of Cam having his own characters and Steve having his own characters which played a part in how you wrote the narrative? Also that I know that he said he knows you guys pass works back and forth, and like, do you have a process for reviewing other people's works? Do you just read it for enjoyment and you know, pass it back, or is it sort of still a collaborative editorial world designing process?
At this point, it's more we're just enjoying each other's work and making comments. I will ask, you know, I might email Steve and say, well, I'd like to use so and so, and where is he anyway? And, you know, where did you leave off? What's her name? That sort of thing. And it's never been like mine or Steve's. It's just it's the world's. They're in the world, and that's always the way it's been.
Yeah, I don't think there was ever anything really formal regarding that. You know, we built this world and we were just going to now write stories in it. And it was always, you know, a question of whether, as Cam says, you know, where did you leave that character and what are they up to right now? Did you have any plans for them for later books?
Yeah.
Just making sure we didn't step on each other's toes in terms of those characters.
I think that is one of I was talking about in the show I did this morning about sort of the Ganabakis books. So the books that take, you know, Orb, Scepter, and Throne, Gardens of the Moon, Toll the Hounds, and how as of the end of Toll the Hounds, there's still a lot of threads with those characters that I think a lot of our authors would have wanted to sort of tighten up and tidy up on their own. And I appreciated the fact that you left them open and said, hey, if you want to find out what happened to these characters, Cam is writing this wonderful series, and that's where those threads are going to end up because they fit better in the story that he's telling. So I think of, you know, Tashrin's ending. I apologize. I've learned that the Malazan audiobooks have butchered all of my pronunciations of names and places, including the series name. I had pronounced it Malazan for years, and then I saw an interview that you guys did with the Critical Dragon, and I was like, I'm sorry, what did they just say? Oh, okay, this is the way it is pronounced. Um,
Don't worry.
Yeah, I
how
wouldn't. I'm not worried about it either. Also, the reader for the Audible never contacted either of us on pronunciation. So,
well, at the very least, you have a consistent pronunciation through across all of your books. So I came to Gardens of the Moon because I was walking through my local bookstore, and the first thing that caught my attention was actually the quote on the front of Gardens of the Moon by Stephen R. Donaldson. And the Thomas Covenant Chronicles, again, speaking about a series that the whole premise is about beauty and beauty being worth defending. And how do you deal with the power of evil? I mean, there are themes that I see in your books as well. I picked up another series because Steve, you wrote the same kind of cover blurb on The Darkness That Comes Before by R. Scott Baker. And the first trilogy's audiobooks, you could tell that the reader went into the back and learned to pronounce the names as Baker had kind of given the pronunciation. In the Aspect Emperor series, the pronunciations change from book to book by the same reader, and it just grates on my ears. So at least it's consistent across all of the books that you have, out in the audio world. All right, so I have a question here from Fallen Toblakai. Is there one character from the Other Person series that you're like, ooh, I would really like to write this character? Can I find a way to work him into my next project?
I enjoyed them all. I ended up having to take on Krupp, and I was very tentative about that because of his voice, which is so unique. And
Yes.
I thought I can't do it justice. But I just sort of did my best and sort of fumbled through it. But he was definitely a character who I really enjoyed.
yeah, there was a character I came up with. I'm not going to mention the name. Not long ago that Cam, you really liked and ended up using. I think in your latest book. I don't think it's your latest book.
What you're currently working on?
Yeah, I'm trying to think if it's the current one or the one you've just done. But yeah, she just sort of came out of nowhere, and my original take on writing her is a section that is intended for the third book of the Witness trilogy. So she hadn't made any appearance anywhere, sort of in the public eye, until Cam picked up on that character and ran with her.
Very cool.
Yeah, and I thought that was really cool.
R.M. Faulkner asked, what made you settle on the history that's occurring in the time you landed on? Have you, I mean, obviously you explored earlier in that with, flashbacks or, the prologues. I still remember reading the prologue of Memories of Ice, and it's 400,000 years before the events of Burn Sleep, and I'm struggling to wrap my head around that. And then you've done the Carcanas trilogy, and you've gone into the future with, A Sail, and now the Witness trilogy. I remember reading an article where you said, like, where do you start the history of Rome? At some point, you just have to pick a time and point and say, here's where I'm starting my history of Rome, thereby allowing all of us to think about Rome for possibly the first time today. So how did you settle on where you were going to start in this massive timeline that you had?
Well, we started with the screenplay, of course, and I think that sort of became the jumping off point, historically, that period. And we sort of built from there. As far as presentation goes, our own backstories were, of course, much deeper for it, but that was the historical moment.
Yeah, and didn't we also do again a back in campaign one, right? Black Dog Blues, which was kind of contemporaneous or to Gardens of the Moon?
It was the campaigns in northern Guinea-Bissau,
Yeah.
and so it would have been later in the later in the empire, but it was very much based, very close in based military thing, sort of like Band of Brothers sort of thing.
Very cool.
Yeah, yeah. I think it just sort of worked organically that where we were going to take the stories was a continuation of everything we had done in the gaming. So in other words, if we had just immediately backtracked and went straight to the very beginnings of the gaming stuff and then wrote it through, the opportunity to entertain each other with our writing would diminish because we'd both been in those games, so we knew them, right?
Right.
So that idea of writing something that was set in the world we were both familiar with, but with that audience of one in mind, right? Me writing for Cam writing for me, to entertain each other, was going to be playing on a lot of in-jokes and all that kind of stuff from the gaming.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that had a lot to do with the fact that we both sort of, okay, we're gonna take where we left off and then run with it, to give the other person something new to read.
So one of the questions I get asked a lot as a game designer is, what kind of game should I make? Because, Dungeons and Dragons is still the 500-pound gorilla in the room, and well, this game system has commercial viability, and so I published a little game set in a fantasy adjacent ancient Near East Levant setting, where basically, because that's where my studies were at in my master's program, and I tell them, listen, you just write for yourself and you write for your table, and if they're having fun, that's really all that matters. Stephen King says he writes for exactly two people, himself and his wife, and if they enjoy it and nobody else enjoys it, then the book's a success. And I loved that in one of the introductions to the Books of the Fallen, you basically dedicated the book to Cam and said, basically, the one person I'm writing for, I hope you enjoy this one. And yeah. I love that.
Yeah, I mean, that's my advice, is just play whatever you love. Just write what you want, what you would want to play, or what you would want to, what you enjoy. And then I hope then that passion is communicated.
Yeah. So last gaming question for both of you. This is from Ladrak. Can you think of something that came up during the tabletop campaign that just like floored you, that the other person did, that still makes you chuckle when you think about it, or completely caught you by surprise?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Cam was very good at absolutely flooring me with stuff he did. Yeah. Yeah. And it kind of played out in his novel Assail, but I won't go into any more detail on that. But yeah, it was pretty wild.
Yeah, he says, Steve, you said you did not see that coming.
No, I didn't see that coming.
I was really surprised. I thought for sure, I thought you saw it coming down the pike a long way back.
If I may talk around it, is this the revelation that has something to do with the Crimson Guard?
No.
Okay.
No.
Oh,
that was
okay.
No, it's it has to do with the making of a sword.
Oh.
That.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
All right. So, switching topics, I have we've seen in sort of the last 20 or 30 years the rise of the genre of grimdark. Joe Abercrombie, George R.R. Martin, Anna Smith Sparks, Richard K. Morgan's A Land Fit for Heroes R. Scott Baker going back to the Second Apocalypse. And I often see the Malazan series sort of added into that because one of my favorite memes of you, Steve, that I have seen online is the quote where George R. R. Martin is like, "Ooh, I'm going to add this new character in just so the audience gets attached, and then I'm going to kill them off in a brutal fashion." And then it's just a picture of you with laughter kind of next to it, because a lot of people die in the Books of the Fallen, and that's not necessarily the end of them. They can come back and die again, and again. And so, but I push back on that because Grimdark has this aesthetic of the reason we have to, the reason sociopaths exist in these worlds is because it's the only way to survive. If you're a good person, if you show compassion, if you have any shred of humanity, you're just going to be eaten up and and spit out into the world. How have you guys encountered your books kind of being called grimdark? What are your thoughts on this categorization of your stories?
Well, I'll let you start on that one, Steve.
You sure? Okay. Yeah. No, our stuff is not grimdark. But one of the issues, of course, is the definition of grimdark is a pretty fluid one, depending on who's using it. So the idea that characters die, why that would be definitive for grimdark, I don't understand, because as far as I can tell, grimdark is fairly, as you say, it's a nihilistic universe that's being presented there, and I guess it's one where might makes right, and everything is justified, because nothing really matters. So I suppose in a metafictional sense, it poses the argument. I guess it was it William Gaskell? Is that his name? Who was in a long debate with John Gardner on issues of moral fiction versus I think is it Gaskell? I think that's his name. Anyways, and his counter argument was that words on the page have no relevance to sort of the moral issues of the day. Anything goes.
Yeah.
Anything goes because it's just invented. So you write a character who dies. Well, it's not a person. It's just a character in a story. So their fate's not relevant, or it has no impact in the world. So anything goes, was sort of his position. And John Gardner was the opposite, saying, no, you have a responsibility to your characters, because at the very least you have to acknowledge that your audience lives in the real world, even if your characters don't. So there's a sort of pull. Now with Grimdark, it's a sort of long way of getting to that, but it's almost that position of anything goes in fiction because it's just fiction. And it has no bearing on nobody died in the writing of this novel, that kind of position. So you can then present any particular worldview you want. It really doesn't matter.
Well, and I agree with you that it's a very nihilistic sort of view and take of the world. When you said might makes right, and that's the end of the discussion, I'm currently reading my son, The Once and Future King, and I'm like, T.H. White would roll it over in his grave with thinking that that's where where genre fiction has sort of ended up. And well, I mean, don't get me wrong, some of the darkest scenes I have ever read have come out of Books of the Fallen. The Panian Domin, the Seven Cities Rebellion, Yucatan, Hobbling, just to name a few off the top of my head that have permanently scarred me for life. Yet this is kind of leading into the next topic that I think one of the main themes across all of your books, I tried to list out just on the top of my head these moments that that were relevant, and I quickly was on a new page of my outline. It was like I can't list all of these things, but that compassion is one of the core themes of, if not the prime theme, at least from my reading, of all of your books. I'm, again, just because I'm in Memories of Ice, right? Ikovian has this wonderful quote where he says, compassion is the only truly priceless thing in the world. We must give it away at every opportunity. And it's so interesting to me that you, well, first of all, would you agree that compassion is one of the main themes? And then why did you choose to run with this idea in a world where most of our point of view characters are soldiers in armies being, you know, sent out to, you know, whose goal is to kill other people? And yet, yeah, I'm going to stop there because I could just keep adding more and more questions. I'll stop there at this point.
Yeah, I'm sure Steve has a lot here, and I'll just say that yes, compassion is central, and it's complex. So circling back to Grimdark, the other problem with it is that it's simplistic, and it simplifies humanity's existence. We are much more complicated than the Hobbesian sort of dog eat dog world. There's a lot, much more to us, to humanity, than that. And to present it that way is it's easy. It's easier to do that. You can sidestep all the complicated humanity stuff that's sort of sticky and but we chose to test it. And one of the places that it gets tested most severely is in conflict.
Yeah.
And I think that's where individuals' true colors can sometimes come out. And it's that test of fire.
Yeah, I definitely agree. That's well said, Cam. It's I mean, I guess it's our efforts to map the human condition to the best of our abilities. And so you need to create dramatic situations, you need to create conflict and tension. And you know, we were both studying, we had studied anthropology by then. And cultures in contact and cultures in conflict are essential components to that discipline. But at the time, that discipline was also undergoing its own crisis of self-examination, because, you know, it's finally sort of being acknowledged that anthropology as a discipline has colonial origins. The whole mindset is colonial. And so there was a kind of a re-examination of those basic premises within the discipline, within the field, which I think is ongoing. And so Cam and I were you know, we come out of that particular crucible in the university where all of this is being questioned. And so if you're going to then build a secondary world, well, this is a place where we can reiterate those questions and start exploring those ideas once removed. So and so once you're thinking of, okay, we're, you know, if you're going to write about colonialism set in the secondary world, there's a lot of stuff that you can approach, and you can do it in a kind of an objective fashion. But there's no escaping the human component to all of this stuff.
Yeah.
And so the more you explore it, as Cam says, the more facets you sort of shed light on.
So, excuse me. Was this idea about compassion making, you know, being one of the defining traits of the human condition or sentient life, was that a theme that you guys had discussed beforehand, or was that just something that arose organically? I know I remember reading, I think it was a Facebook comment where somebody was pushing back about it's, you know, Malaz is so realistic because you have these, you know, uneducated soldiers discussing these deep philosophical topics. And I believe one of you responded, well, hey, we were on dig sites with armed, you know, people who were raised as soldiers, and when all you do is, you know, kill and fight for your life, all you think about during the quiet times is what it means to live and what life is like. So, can you guys talk about that? Kind of, was it an organic decision? Was it something planned because it's important to you guys?
Well, it wasn't overtly discussed.
Okay.
I know Steve has, had a much, his arc is of course the central. But when we were just set out to write them and to use our material for fiction, we didn't say, okay, we're going to do this.
Right.
We didn't actually talk it over.
Because then it's propaganda, right? You're trying to preach at somebody.
It just sort of came out of the material. But speaking from my side of things, I think that I approach these situations, even in uneducated soldiers. Well, who says they're uneducated?
Right.
They're educated in a lot of ways, and everyone is as human as everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's, I think, where it comes out. We wanted to show the full humanity of anyone, any character can possess depths that we would never have assigned to them on just meeting someone. It's when you get to know them that you realize, wow, there's so much here in this person. And I think that's sort of that kind of contact is what I was hoping to try and get across.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Even within, I guess anthropology, there's a conceit that, well, let's not talk anthropology, let's talk archaeology and ancient history. There's a conceit that as you go further back in time, people get more simple.
Mm-hmm.
Simply because there is, quote, at least observable, less sophistication in their cultural artifacts and their lifestyle and all the rest. And it's one that is quickly disavowed when you study anthropology. You realize that the human condition is incredibly complex, regardless of the technological level, if you will, of the cultures in question. So somebody from 5th century, 7th century BC in northern Greece or something, their interior world is as full as our world, right? And so that assumption that you're going to have your barbarian is only going to be thinking about raping, looting, and pillaging, and getting rich and forming a kingdom, and yet not having any internal landscape of thought and experience, is simplistic. And just because you're setting something in a quasi-medieval setting, to me does not give one sort of permission to reduce actual human living people, as you're creating them in fiction, to the most simple tropes imaginable,
right,
in order to fit your story. So I mean, I think that's one of the things that Cam and I discovered in the gaming, that quite often we would have, one of us would be, think your cliche scenario where your character that you've rolled up goes into a tavern and decides to have, you don't know what's coming next, you don't know what your storyline is, and so you go and talk to the tavern keeper, and somehow you get your story there, and they point you in the right direction, all the rest. Well, Cam and I made points of confounding that every single time, right? The innkeeper would lie through his teeth, or wouldn't say anything. And I had that character Obo in Malaz City, that every time one of Cam's characters, like Kellenbed, needed help and he came to the door, Obo would open it up and Kellenbed would lay out his story and Obo would slam the door in his face, and that would be it. End of story for him. So that idea that even your secondary, tertiary, all those people, they have their own lives, and they are as sophisticated and potentially in their thinking as any reader.
Yeah.
And I think that was one of the things we really wanted to, we learned by accident in a sense, as part of the way we structured our games, was that, you know, nothing was going to be easy for anyone, and people are complicated.
There is a C.S. Lewis quote from, I believe, The Discarded Image, where he's talking about the medieval mindset and how kind of the modern mindset is to believe that we're standing at the top of a ladder, and everything below us gets darker and darker and darker down into the depths. Whereas the medieval mindset was the belief that they stand at the top of a stairway, or they stand at the bottom of a stairway looking up into light. And it's really easy, I think, especially in our modern day and age, to look back on previous cultures and write them off because, I mean, look at what they didn't have. And I always like to point out, well, remember, we're still reading Homer. Socrates is still the foundation of, you know, Western philosophy. And how many multi-generational buildings that are still standing have we built? You know, like the cathedrals, which would take 100 years or more to build and are still standing today.
Mm.
Whereas our, you know, our infrastructure, if we don't maintain it, is gone in, you know, 80 years or something like that. Like it's an easy surface level to write off everyone before us as more simplistic until you actually even scratch the surface of it and realize, no, these people had, as you said, just as deep and complex and rich interior lives as we do ourselves. Is it, you know, if not maybe a little more so, because they didn't have all of the distractions and of sort of our modern life. You mentioned depths, and I kind of wanted to come back to that because one of the things that I have loved about, again, reading the Malaz oeuvre is the fact that, one, you have certain characters that are only seen in through the lens of someone else. Like, we never get to see the interior of their thoughts. We only get to see how other people think of them and react to them. And then we hit another one of the series, and suddenly they're a point of view character. I think of Surly in, you know, Empress Lysine. In the Books of the Fallen, we're seeing her through the eyes of people who feel betrayed by her or who see her aspects in a certain light. And then we get into the Malaz Empire series, and suddenly we're getting a completely different view of her, and she becomes a very sympathetic character. Except for Malik Rel, no matter how many different points of view I get of that guy, I just increase in my depths of loathing for Malik
Oh,
Rel.
he's just misunderstood.
I don't know. You know, even in the latest, in your latest book, Cam, uh, Forge of the High Mage, where we get to see the Falari Isles, like from the first scene, I'm like, he's just a completely loathsome character. Um, that's different than we see in a lot of fantasy fiction, right? Most fantasy fiction these days is written in sort of the third person omniscient, where we get to see inside of everyone's head. Um, you know, I think when Tolkien started it, Tolkien had a very, very specific view of how these things were passed down. And so, right, he coined the term, there's no tale without the teller. And so most, you know, all of his stuff has a point of view, even if we're not necessarily aware of it at the time. And you guys kind of carried that idea that, right, there's certain people telling this story, and we're never going to see this other person except sort of in a, I don't want to say apotropaic way, not apotropaic, that's not the word I was looking for, not protective, but sort of the negative, where we're filling in the spaces around them by everyone else's viewpoint. What led you to take that tact? Again, because it's very different than what we are currently getting in genre fiction.
Well, we both studied creative writing, and in workshopping, it's usually short stories are the medium.
Mm-hmm.
At least for us. You know, you can do poetry if you choose to as well. But we were, and in that format, you can choose certain ways to tell stories.
Mm-hmm.
Go first person, you can go second person, you can go third, and then in third, there's degrees of closeness and distance.
Mm-hmm.
You choose one, and then you stay with it for the length of that story, right? And you don't jump around. If even if it's convenient and if you need to, you've chosen your canvas and you stick with it. And I think that's one of sort of the reasons behind what you see, and where we don't go where we don't, and stay where we are, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, but also histories, I think as a discipline, as a study, is actually all about implicit point of view.
Mm-hmm.
So the witnesses or the historians are putting their flavor to events, and then if you get, you know, two historians who are at odds with each other over the same event, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
You know, then people talk about that kind of stuff. So within fiction, um, it's I think it's a lot of, I think there was a Kurosawa film that's all about multiple witnesses to a single crime.
Yes.
Rashomon.
Yeah,
Yeah, Rashomon.
yeah, and that's interesting, isn't it? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it's where you have to question the nature of reality itself,
Yeah.
as being something separate from consciousness, and so you know, in this world, it's a fictional world, and it supposedly has, you know, a physical reality, some verisimilitude, but it's shaped by all the characters who are moving through it. And so if all those characters were completely consistent amongst each other, that would be a pretty boring story, and a pretty unbelievable world. So I think we just naturally fell into that notion that there are going to be conflicting points of view, um, even in the building of the world. And then, of course, in the meta sense, that's reflected in the fact that Cam and I are co-creators of the world.
Right. And even if you, I love when people ask me, you know, what's a role playing game like? I often use the example of, well, if you're playing a game of Risk, you may remember that one time that you rolled triple sixes as you were coming in from Kamchatka to Alaska. Sorry, Cam, you've been invaded. And you might remember that. But in a role playing game, you have a collective sense of memory of, no shit, there I was. Cam saved me from a dragon. Not saved my character from a dragon, saved me, because there's this blurring and almost incarnation when we're playing of ourselves and our characters. And yet, as you pointed out, the witness effect is in play even in those memories, and that we're all remembering that in a level of reality that people who weren't there, we can share the story, and it's never the same as being there. We're all going to tell that story differently because we all saw it from different angles and facets.
Exactly.
Yeah, you choose, like I was saying about story, you choose your point of views and you stay with them.
Mm-hmm.
And they decide the story, and they'll each tell their tale, and each of their tales should be different. Yeah.
And then if you want to tell the story from a different point of view, you write another story with different characters as the point of view characters.
Yeah, I think Cam's right. The workshops and the writing programs we did leaned heavily into the unreliable narrator, and so that's stuff we were exploring all over the place. And then if you build an entire fantasy world and you build it exclusively from unreliable narrators, well, that's what, in a sense, that's what helps create the atmosphere of mystery that surrounds the world.
And not necessarily deliberately unreliable. It's just that people don't know everything, right? Everyone has their own set of knowledge, and so they just aren't aware that they got something wrong.
Yeah.
Right? They're
Yeah,
right.
make it up. Yeah, we make up stuff all the time.
Uh, well, I think of Herodotus, and
Mhm.
just reading through Herodotus, he's adding his own interpretations of what he's seeing and the stories he's being told. That years later, people are like, "Oh, well, obviously he was wrong, and he was talking about this thing." And I'm like, I don't care, because at there's this shift in history around the Enlightenment and after, where it's like we
Mhm.
have to record it exactly as it how it happened. And before that, everyone was like, "This is the story of what happened. Here's the truths that it tells us." But uh, Caesar's uh, Caesar's Gaelic War series that he wrote. Those were actually written far later than Caesar's life, but we still attribute them to Caesar, and they're his point of view of what's going on. Um, the story of Troy was old when Homer wrote it down and kind of encapsulated it. And I find that nature of storytelling and that view of history far more real than sort of the modern view. But I mean, again, the ancient Near East was my was my area of academic study. So obviously, I'm bent towards that style and that era.
Even in our gaming, Steve and I preferred the poetic truth over the literal truth.
Um, so one of the
Yeah.
games that we're publishing is a game called Emboria: The World Under Starlight that my buddy Richard is writing, and his world building is poetry. He'll write the poem of the event that happened, and then he'll let it sit, and then he'll come back to it and write two or three reimaginings of that in different styles from different authors at different points. And that's how he's done his world building for the last 20 years. And now I'm like, hey, you should be making this into a role playing game. And so, we're helping him kind of move that into there. But yeah, the poetic world building and poetic history was the dominant form of history for a very long section of
Mhm.
our existence as a species.
Yeah, I think the presumption of an objective reality is actually vastly limited our modern era and the way we think about the past, the way we think about the present, even.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it's you talked about Herodotus or Strabo or people like that.
Xenophon, yeah.
Xenophon, and then you read, you read their histories, and I remember reading Barry Cunliffe's book on the steppes and the origins of the Scythians and all that kind of
Mm-hmm.
stuff. And archaeology is now starting to support a lot of those early historians in their assertions and their interpretations, which is even more interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Ag-
it's cool stuff.
Again, the idea that we know more now than they
Mm.
did back then. So obviously, we're just going to attempt to reframe everything that's come before through our own modern viewpoint. Just really puts blinders on us and really narrows our view
Yeah, and
of history.
it's I mean, the best example I think would be the early accounts of the Amazons,
Mm-hmm.
right? The female warriors, um, which because of modern, well, relatively modern patriarchy and all the rest, just sort of wrote all that off. That was all nonsense. And then as excavations started to expand in the steppe regions, and we started to find kurgans that had female warriors,
Mm-hmm.
really presented in a very martial sense in the burials. And I mean, you can find that in the Norse stuff as well, in
Yeah.
Denmark, places like that. And suddenly the narrative then has to change
Yeah.
with respect to the history. And it's just a good reminder that, at any point in time, you may think that we've got it all sussed out, but we don't. And quite often the past actually, well, why wouldn't it? Why wouldn't it know more about itself than we
Exactly.
know about it now?
My sister is in the scientific fields, and she loves saying science is merely the least wrong answer that we have at the moment. And I love that because it does bring kind of this humility back to the knowledge that we currently possess.
Yeah.
All right. So one quick question from Educational Dear: when Malaz is represented, be it in an adaptation or just as we're presenting it to others, what is the main idea you kind of hope people take away from the series as a whole?
Oh. Cam?
Well, we had talked about compassion, certainly, but also maybe questions certainty. I think there's so many characters who are certain of themselves, who do so much damage in our series, and I hope the readers will come away from that and think, maybe I shouldn't be so certain about things.
It brings to mind my favorite verse from the Gospels is the guy who comes to Christ and asks, "Hey, heal my son," and Christ responds with, "If you only believed, he would already be healed." And the father replies, "I do believe. Help my unbelief." And the fact that faith and doubt are not opposites, they have to exist in tension with each other. As soon as you have this idea of certainty, that's where a lot of things go wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and I would certainly argue that that's a secular failing, not a spiritual one.
Yeah.
Because I think we experience a desire to control the environment to the best of our ability, and if that environment also includes the society around you, then you extend that control outwards, basically to avoid the unforeseen.
Yeah.
But life is full of the unforeseen. So, as much as you may struggle against and seek to control, quite often in literature, writers write about it all the time, but in history as well. I mean, it's you can't win that battle.
Yeah.
So I guess humility is probably part of the main series. Honest doubt, I think, is present throughout, as a corollary to what Cam just said about certainty.
Yeah.
And the fact that things are never as simple as they may first appear, especially when it comes to the human condition. We're complicated beasts.
I don't know what synapses fired, but in Godzilla, the latest Godzilla movie, or the latest in the start of the new franchise, there's this wonderful moment when Ken Watanabe, I believe, says the biggest, I'm paraphrasing here, but the biggest error that humans make is that they're in control of nature and not the other way around. And the fact that the director put that line in there when he viewed Godzilla as sort of a natural disaster movie was very interesting to me, because it really kind of strips away, anytime we have a natural disaster, it strips away any illusion of control that we have. I think back, tsunamis, Hurricane Katrina, any of these, earthquakes, these major events where our modern illusion of control and domination of just even our, immediate surroundings completely breaks down, right? There's nothing that we can do, right? Acts of God, as insurance claims usually write things off as, like, it's a beautiful thing to just remind ourselves, and as you guys keep coming back to, is humility, like this idea that, hey, we're actually in control of a lot less at any given point than we actually think we are.
I think that's what Godzilla is all about, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Godzilla is the metaphor for that uncontrollable nature.
Exactly. Yeah. All right. So, do you guys want to take some time to talk about what's up next for Malaz? I know we've hinted that Cam is writing another book. Steve, I know you have several series that you're, or two series that you're working on, but I think you said recently that there's another book in the Bacalane and Corball Brooch
Yeah, yeah,
novellas.
that will be probably not until the new year.
Okay.
I need to finish the second book in the Witness. And I'm in the unusual experience of cutting and pasting scenes in order to, because it turned out to be two novels in one, and I need to fix that. So it slowed me up a little bit, but that's sort of where I'm at right now.
Okay.
And I'm working on the next piece that will follow along from Forge of the High Mage.
And that the Seven Cities initial.
Well, I don't know what degree I can let stuff out of the
Okay.
bag, but
Yeah. Please don't violate anything that would hold up the books. And I assume things like this, a lot of people have asked this question, so I'm going to ask it, realizing that there may be shrouds of NDAs and deep magics from before the dawn of this this podcast that prevent you from saying anything. But a lot of people on the Malazan subreddit are asking about like adaptations, whether it's novels or movies or comics or role-playing games, going back to our initial discussion. Is there anything that you could share on that, or is that something that must remain locked behind a vault of silence at this point?
yeah, we can't talk about any of that.
Okay.
No, I mean, the only thing I would say that if anything were to happen, it will without doubt involve both myself and Cam.
Excellent.
Yeah, that's how we're framing it.
Yeah.
Whenever we're approached, we always say that we have to be involved, and that might be the reason why it's taking so.
Could be.
I mean, I don't think it's a bad way to go. Just looking out at the landscape of current adaptations, I think it's a solid and smart way to go. We had a question just that popped up. Is there ever a question that you expect interviewers to ask, but always gets kind of left by the wayside?
Can't think of one.
Okay.
No, I don't think so.
All right. So if you guys are okay with it, I have just a couple of final questions. I know, Steve, you got another interview, and I do not want to impinge upon that at all. Do you guys foresee an ending of the series? I mean, obviously, from what we've talked about, not like an end, like where the world gets blown up, because history continues to roll on, but it may be a time where you guys have said, all right, it's time to set the pens down on Malaz. We've told the stories we want to tell in that. Or is this a well that you plan on keep coming back to?
No, I can see where I would put the pen down on the world. Yeah, I think it could happen. If I don't drop dead first.
Yeah, I'm sort of there with you on that. Same thing. Yeah, there is an end. There's a definite end. Whether I live to reach it remains to be seen, but we'll see.
All right. So some questions from your fans on the Malaz Reddit. Is there more to Edgewalker than we currently know? And will we ever get more information about this character, or is this just going to be one of the eternal mysteries of the Malaz series?
No, if I don't drop dead in the next 3 years, you'll get an answer to that.
Excellent.
Yeah, there's a lot more to Edgewalker.
Yeah.
Let's see.
If you had to pick a favorite book written by the other, what would your what would your top pick be?
Blood and Bone.
I have it because it's so personal. I have a lot of affection for Gardens. It's just because of what it means or to both of us.
Yeah.
And how, what it started. And it's sort of like the foundation stone. And I have a lot of affection for that.
So Steve, you didn't even blink. Like there was not even a heartbeat of pause that you. I mean, you just blood and what is it about Blood and Bone that makes it your favorite?
Um, because I guess maybe because I know to some extent that it was a story generated by Cam's experience in the East, in Asia, and his explorations there. Tied in, I guess, with the PhD he was working on around there, or just before that. Does that sound right, Cam? Your ideas of the travel writing and colonialism were pretty central to your PhD stuff. And so I could see how that informed a lot of it. But also, I absolutely adored the chronicler on the Great March.
Yes.
Uh, that was one of the best commentaries, and on historians.
Yeah.
That was Cam's take on it, and I absolutely adored it.
All right. This one is from actually a friend of the show. She is putting together all of the little Advent pieces that we're sharing online, and kind of helped generate a lot of the interest for doing the advertising for this show. She would like to know more about the development of Fellison's character. I mean, uh, she loves engaging with Fellison's story. Can you just talk about how you came up with Fellison? I mean, obviously, deep ties to Tavore, who is a major character in the second half of the series. Deep ties with Ganois, who is exists throughout the whole of the series. Where did Fellison's character come from?
She was a throw-in character from an early section of Gardens of the Moon when Paran heads home and
Mm-hmm.
meets Tavor, and I threw in a younger sister. And then the second book was like Deadhouse Gates was kind of me exploring siblings, but I knew I couldn't get to Tabor,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and I couldn't really get to Paran either. So uh, my father was a child psychologist, and so I remember, he was, well, basically I read all his textbooks because he went back to school. So I was in high school when all these university textbooks were coming out. So I always had an interest in psychology. And he was dealing with trauma um, in children, and so it struck me that quite often a lot of fantasy books would describe a scene that was fundamentally traumatic, and yet have the characters just sort of shrug it off and move
Right.
on to the next scene. um, so with Felicin, but also I wanted a character who um, was not going to be easy,
Yeah.
to read, or but to remain honest to their particular point of view and the struggles they were going through. And so um, it was just an extended exploration of trauma.
I think of Ikovian saying that soldiers are issued armor for their flesh and have to forge the armor of their soul piece by piece, and really that forging happens in response to trauma. And
Yeah.
so I see a lot of that going on in her story. She's a very divisive character. Was that the goal? Were you
No,
expecting such a
no,
backlash from the fans?
no, I didn't expect that at all. People are quick to judge, I
Yeah.
think, in the real world. And so when a fictional character comes up like that, they're equally quick to judge.
Yeah. She Tink is actually in our chat, and she's like, yes, this is why she's so fascinating to me. Her reactions are the most realistic to her circumstances.
Cool.
You recently published a Facebook essay on magic as a tool for an author to leverage literary connotation, and it really impacted irrelevant pierogi. I also enjoyed putting this list together because I got to read some of the funniest Reddit names, which is just fantastic. Like, I'm not judging irrelevant pierogi. I love eating pierogies. I don't think any pierogi is irrelevant. But these next three questions come from this person. Insofar as like how did you make use of this idea in your works?
What, connotation and denotation?
Yes, based off
But ju-
your magic as a tool for authors to leverage that.
Um, I guess Cam, you and I mean, when we were at UVic, there was a huge push to be reading magic realism, and um, so much of magic realism was well, two things. One, it was generally, a lot of it was emerging as subversive literature, depending on the political situation of the homeland of the writers. So
Mhm.
that was kind of in play. But as Cam and I used to discuss, especially Cam, there was a lot of existentialism buried in the magic realist stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
um, the idea of the function um, of magic, it part of that was part of the discussions that Cam and I would have on this kind of stuff. But also the anthropology side of things also talks about the function of magic in storytelling and myth making.
Mhm.
Um, and then narrative structure, right, Cam? Connotation and denotation. I mean, Valgertson hammered that into us as students at UVic, and yeah, it the message came through loud and clear, at least for me, and probably for you as well. So, and then fantasy as a genre, that's, I mean, it's ready made for this stuff.
It really is.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Our definition of magic is very broad.
Yeah.
Well, all right. So that brings up uh, there's currently this debate, this you know, because it's the internet, so everything is instantly polarized. In fantasy literature of hard magic systems versus soft magic systems. And one of the things I love about Malaz is that the Warrens and the Holds throughout the series, we start to understand them better, but they never stop being mysterious and, to use a Tolkien term, enchanting. Uh, would you say that you purposely are keeping the magic system a little bit more fluid, a little bit more mysterious, more on the quote softer side, as opposed? I mean, obviously, I think the poster child of um, Brandon's of hard magic systems is Brandon Sanderson, where magic really is a Rube Goldberg machine, where if you're Columbo, you can figure out how the twists and turns are going to work before the characters in the story figure out how the magic system works. And it ends up feeling more like detective fantasy physics for me than something that's truly. If you like Sanderson, I'm not. I'm just describing my views on how his magic systems come into play. It, do you feel like the Warrens are more of a softer side? Do you feel like have you tried to keep them a little bit more mysterious?
Well, for me, I don't think that debate is a legitimate debate anyway. I don't think there's if hard, soft.
Yeah.
No.
Dichotomies are false, including the one that I just said.
For me, I approached it as magic being, like Steve said, a tool, a metaphor for the mystery of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And the mystery of the world has not gone away. It's still with us. And so mystery abides, it continues. And so mystery will always remain among in the Warrens and among our understanding of the world.
Yeah, yeah, it serves the original function of magic in the earliest storytelling.
Yeah.
It's there to evoke wonder and mystery and recognition of the unknown and the unknowable. As soon as you systematize it, you've applied a very modern mechanical sensibility to the
It's not
workings of
magic.
the universe.
Yeah. Yeah. It's physics we don't understand.
Yeah.
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 So somebody was like, "Is there any chance that you would return to gaming for perhaps a Malaz one-shot charity event?"
Oh my goodness.
I know. When I read this question, I was like, well, if they need a DM, I would be more than willing to volunteer for something like that. But I figured I would ask the question.
We did so much one-on-one that I don't know. It's hard to break
Yeah.
that
Okay.
possible.
I mean, possible. I'll take. Like, I would sit and watch you guys play one-on-one Malaz. That would be.
That would be very funny.
It would be very funny. I'm sure there would
It
be
would be
a
funny,
lot of
yeah.
people who would enjoy that. Well, I got just two more questions. I'll start with the easy one. Do you remember the real? Do you remember the inspiration for the term divers? Is it
Yeah, it's diverse.
okay? That was this this redditor, um,
Yeah.
and there's Stone. That was their question. But I have a follow-up question to that. Will we ever sort of understand the spice scent that kind of serves as a warning around these shapeshifters?
No.
Okay. It reminds me of there was a setting in early role playing called Tekkamul, which was M.R. Barker's sort of science fantasy game, and there were certain monsters that had exuded certain scents. Like if you smelled cinnamon, you ran because it was associated with this. The scent of cinnamon was this really powerful enemy that most people just couldn't handle in their games. And so I've always wondered that if there's a link to Tekkamul, or if it was just invoking another sense, which I think
Yeah.
sense of smell is one that usually gets left out in descriptions in fiction.
It does. Yeah. Yeah. Using all the senses. I
Oh,
think.
use all the senses.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
The last question that we had was from Jurinor, and I'm going to condense this down, but essentially, are some of your characters representatives of specific philosophies? His example of kind of Grub in contrast to Sin's nihilism, the works of Albert Camus, things like that. Do you ever have a character who you're like, this is going to embody this certain philosophy or this certain point of view?
Not necessarily one-to-one, but certainly stances.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, I was trying to think of a Albert Camus stand-in the Malazan world, and I don't think we have one of those, but more likely in your stuff is yeah, than mine. But yeah, I think it's more worldviews are being compared and contrasted.
Which is, I mean, how they interact in the real world anyway. So it just adds another level of realism to the discussions and interactions between the characters and across the series.
Mm.
Well, gentlemen, thank you. This was a wonderful time. I hope you enjoyed it. To everybody who tuned in for this, this will be going available on YouTube for you to comment on and continue enjoying for years to come. I thank you for taking this time out to just sit and talk about gaming and compassion and beauty and writing. It's been a wonderful discussion.
Thank you.
Well, thanks again. Thanks again for the invite.
Oh, it's my pleasure. We'll be back with more Beyond the Table on Monday. Hopefully, I will confirm that when I'm going to be talking with Rick Meints of Chaosium, and we're going to be discussing Greg Stafford in detail as one of the founding luminaries of the role-playing hobby. So until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, stay gaming. I am JM. This has been Beyond the Table, and I will see you all later. Have a good one.